All right, well, good. I'm back on. Is that better? Yeah. I doubt anybody missed anything too important. If it did cut out on you, ooh, that is loud. If it did cut out on you before I gave you the information about the cell phone, be sure to text any questions you have to the cell phone number, and we will answer them at the conclusion of the presentation today. I'm going to hold it out this time. Is this a little better? Okay. All right. Is that coming through? Move it up a little. Okay. All right. First of all, let me tell you how we're organized. We're a commission by statute of 5 individuals. We currently have 3 individuals who are serving. We're waiting on some appointments from the appointing authorities to get us a full slate of commissioners. Our current chairman is John Plunk. He's a lawyer from Athens, Alabama. We also have Justice Lynn Stewart, former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. She's our co-chair. Then we have General Ed Kroll, who is serving for his second time on the Ethics Commission. Our commissioners are appointed for staggered 5-year terms, and they're appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the House. Because we have had 2 resignations from the commission, those are appointed by the governor. There are 7 legislative days left, and so we may have a couple before the end of the session. We certainly hope so. Typically function with 5. We can function with 3 as we are now because that is a quorum for the commission. But they make all the official decisions for the commission. What we do for most public officials and public employees in the state, and certainly for lobbyists as well, is give opinions about the Ethics Act itself. We can do this in one of 2 ways, and some of you may have some experience with this, especially if you have practiced in other jurisdictions, and I know that we have a lot of multi-state lobbyists who have registered for this training today. So you should be familiar with opinion processes as they exist in other jurisdictions. We have an informal opinion process, which is the staff's ability to answer questions from the Act that are easily discernible from either the clear language of the code or from previous advisory opinions we've given. So a lot of times we'll have questions specifically from lobbyists about their activities and whether, for example, they are lobbying to the degree that requires them to register as a lobbyist in Alabama. Because we have answered that question numerous times, that is an opinion that we are able to give through an informal opinion. A formal opinion, on the other hand, is reserved for questions that have not been answered before and generally are not clearly discernible from the clear language of the Code of Alabama itself. We give far fewer formal advisory opinions because most of the questions under this body of law have in fact been answered. One good example of a formal advisory opinion that we've issued for lobbyists and for principals, in other words, the businesses or the individuals who retain lobbyists, is if you're having a big function and you have a number of people who are participating, whether you can aggregate those expenses among all of the participants for the conference, either whether they be lobbyists or the businesses that employ them. So we answered that question through a formal advisory opinion. There are some values to formal advisory opinions that informal opinions do not carry. And the primary one is that if you request a formal advisory opinion, it gives you protection from prosecution if you receive a formal advisory opinion. So in the example that I gave of the aggregation, if you follow that advisory opinion, if someone were to question whether your disclosure was compliant with the act, you've got a formal advisory opinion which gives you protection from prosecution as long as you follow the four corners of that document. A formal advisory opinion, however, has to be answered by our commission, who has to approve them at a formal meeting, and they meet every 60 days. Generally, when people have questions under the act, they need a turnaround fairly quickly, and they need that turnaround certainly quicker than 60 days. That's why our informal opinion process is incredibly helpful, because it can get you a turnaround very quickly. An informal opinion, however, does not give you protection from prosecution, although it certainly is valuable evidence in any question that may arise about your conduct. We encourage people to ask for informal opinions. Lobbyists don't request them a lot, but sometimes y'all do. And so if you have a question about any conduct under the Act, whether a gift is allowed, whether there is a certain event that you can hold, be sure to contact our office and we will tell you the best way to get that question answered for you. But I did want to tell you about the opinion process because it is something that you, as someone who is covered by the Ethics Act, can take advantage of. We also have as one of our key functions enforcement. We are a very limited agency. We can only react to complaints that are filed with us. We cannot aggressively pursue complaints on our own. They have to be filed with us in writing, signed by the person who files the complaint, and they have to be supported by credible and verifiable information. Once we have a complaint like that states a violation of the Ethics Act, in other words, it would state that someone has used his or her office for personal gain, or they have engaged in some form of corruption, then we can consider that complaint and investigate it. Our agents, we have 5 of them, have subpoena authority. They are APO certified, so they can receive documents, they can talk to witnesses. They will work up a case and present it to our commission, who will sit as a grand jury of sorts and hear the evidence and decide whether it is more likely than not that there's been a violation of the Act. If they find that there has more likely than not been a violation of the Act, they will refer that case for further investigation and possible prosecution to either the Attorney General or to the local DA. Our complaint process must be completed within 180 days, although our commission can, for certain reasons, for good cause, extend the period of time in which they can consider a complaint to an additional 180 days, but the most a complaint can be pending with us is 360 days. Now, I'll be honest with you, we really haven't had very many, if any, complaints filed against lobbyists or principals. Generally, it comes from public officials, and primarily the allegations are whether they have used their office for personal gain. I think this is in large part due to the fact that most of the gifting areas under the Ethics Act have been formalized in the statute itself. We've been operating under the current version of the Ethics Act for 14 years, and everybody pretty much knows where the lines are, certainly in terms of what can be given and what can be received by public officials. So that process is actually pretty formalized at this point, and most folks who have been doing this for a while realize kind of where the lines are there. I will, however, talk briefly about what is allowed and what is disallowed, because that's the world in which y'all pretty much live. So the overall theme of the Ethics Act is that no public official or public employee can use or allowed to be used their official position for personal gain. Now, specific to lobbyists, there are a couple of sections that deal with what you can and can't give. The primary one is Section 5.1 of the Code, and it specifies that no lobbyist or principal or a subordinate of a lobbyist can offer a thing of value to a public official or a public employee. And so you've probably heard that term a good bit, a thing of value. A thing of value is defined as any gift, any benefit, any favor, any service or gratuity, any offer of future employment. So it's a fairly broad definition. However, the definition itself encompasses things that have a monetary value assessed to it. It doesn't have to have a dollar figure attached to it, but in nearly every case, it's going to be able to be reducible to some dollar figure. Okay, so what you're really talking about here are gifts that you can give folks, tickets, meals that you can buy. And so I know that now that we're kind of coming close to the end of the session, you may have some experience with this anyway because of just activities that have gone on during the session. But remember that that's the general prohibition, but there are 18 exceptions to that. One of the exceptions, I start out with this one. This is the smallest one. This probably provides the least relief of anybody, and it gets very few people too excited, but it's the de minimis exception. In the code, de minimis is defined as $25. However, the legislature gave us the authority to increase that figure based on inflation, and last year we increased it up to $32 per occasion with an annual cap of $64. I know that's not a lot of money, but I'll tell you the way most people use that is in addition to the other exceptions that they've got. For example, I know that there have been occasions where lobbyists have had legislative receptions, or they might have had informational dinners where they've invited members of committees to it. And this de minimis exception allows you to give other things in addition to the meal. It might be I hate to say goodie bag, but kind of like that, of smaller items that might be relevant to your industry. It's just another exception that gives you a little bit more relief to the exceptions that apply there. So I've seen it. I know that there is one group that does, represents the vending machines groups out there. And I know that at the beginning of the session, they'll have a de minimis bag that has their items in it that they'll give to all members of the legislature. I mean, again, it's a small thing, but it's there, so why not take advantage of it when you can? And, with the increased gifting, sometimes people have used that various times of the year where gift giving may be appropriate, for example, during the holidays. So just remember that de minimis is a standalone exception. You don't have to, it's not limited by the other exceptions within the code. It is an add to, it's an add on, so you've got that. However, most of what you will be doing falls into one of these three exceptions, and you're probably going to be in the first two. Nearly every lobbyist I know participates to some extent in what we call a widely attended event. I know that you've heard of that. If any of you do any federal lobbying, the widely attended gathering is the same thing as a widely attended event in Alabama. It's roughly the same type of function. You have to have a certain number of people. In Alabama, you have to have at least 12 people you expect are going to be there, or reasonably expect will show up. There's got to be some informational component to it. It can't be purely social. There has to be a diversity of views expressed. The way most people accomplish this is they will have a legislative dinner and they'll invite two committees from the legislature, one from the House, one from the Senate. You'll talk about legislation that's important to you over dinner. All of that's allowed. If you pursue a widely attended event, there is no cap on how much you can spend. You are not limited in dollar amount for these exceptions. You might also have a widely attended event that is in conjunction with another larger function. The second exception that a lot of you will take advantage of is the educational function. Typically, this is reserved for multi-day kind of conferences. Think about like the BCA conference. I know the League of Municipalities has an annual conference. The counties have a conference. Manufacture Alabama will have various functions throughout the year where they will invite a bunch of public officials, they'll invite a bunch of public employees. You'll be at a place maybe like the Grand Hotel down in Point Clear, Alabama, where you spread it out over a number of days. There will be an agenda. There will be social events in connection with it. All of those fall within the exception to the general prohibition about providing a thing of value to a public official. The third exception, which is less often used, is the economic development function. Every now and then this will pop up, but I'll tell you, it tends to pop up in relation to specific events like the Farnborough Air Show, Paris Air Show, some of the international events where Commerce will attend to take a big delegation. Members from the legislature will go, the governor will go. But the point of it is to promote a good faith but specific economic development goal. Okay, so it's generally tied to an industry. It's tied to a specific goal that the government officials hope to achieve by attending this, but it, as the other two exceptions, allows for meals, it allows for registration fees to be paid, it allows for hotel rooms to be paid for, and it also allows for hospitality to be covered by the groups. So all of that generally is allowed, and there are limits to what you can spend for that. So they're pretty open-ended with that. The only obligation with respect to those events that I just described to you is that if you spend in excess of $250 in a 24-hour period, then you have to report that to the commission. Now, we have had instances where, for example, members of the press will be aware that you have an educational function that you are hosting. And so they will go through and they will look at the disclosures and they will see whether you have disclosed payments to public officials as you're required to do currently under the Act. We have had them say, you know, such and such group had a function down at the Grand Hotel. The rooms alone are in excess of $250 a night. They didn't disclose anything. You know, what's the deal? When that has happened, what we will usually do is call the sponsor and say, you have not filed your quarterly disclosure that's got the required disclosure in it. You need to get it into us. And this brings up a good point. We want you to comply. We don't really want to handle complaints against you for not complying. So if you miss your deadline to file, go ahead and file anyway. If you forget to disclose something that you should have disclosed, go ahead and disclose it anyway, because compliance will solve most of the problems that are out there when people complain. But the point for you to remember is that people do look at this stuff, and your disclosures are accessible by the public through our website. And we're mandated to do that by Alabama law. So just be aware that somebody may look, so make sure that your disclosures are accurate and make sure you do them on time. And this is a good point to bring up at this time, that your quarterly disclosures are due April 30th. So make sure that you comply, and Kayla, our lobbyist liaison, has asked me to pass that on to you today. So just make sure that you get those in, because we want you to be in compliance. Okay, I'm glad everybody can hear me. I don't see any questions yet. Do either of the two of you have questions about any of this that I've gone over? I've got 2 live participants, and I unfortunately am ignoring them for everybody who is online, but just speak up, throw your hands up if you've got something. Okay, I'm going to talk definitionally about these just for a little bit. Remember that for a widely attended event, you have to have 12. There's got to be a diversity of views expressed in the group that you're inviting. I mean, again, if you've got a question about whether your event qualifies as this, just ask us. There's a pretty informational tool that we can give you that, hang on a minute, that should answer a lot of questions for you if you haven't done these kind of events before. We have a process for approving these ahead of time. Most of you know what this is. Most of you at least heard about it, but it's called pre-certification. So if you want to do one of these events and you want us to approve it, you can request from us that we approve it. And that's called requesting pre-certification. What we will need from you is an outline of the event that you want to put on, a list of who you're inviting, so that we have verification that at least there's a diversity of views expressed within the group of invitations, and you can ask us to certify that as being in compliance with the Ethics Act. The good part about that, and why I think this is a good educational tool for people, especially if you're a lobbyist who hasn't done this very long, the pre-certifications are posted on our website. They're public records. We have a pre-certification drop-down that gives a calendar of events. You can click on one of those events and you can see the requests that came into us and our approval. I think if you were starting out, it's incredibly helpful, because most of the people in groups who request pre-certification often know exactly what to put in the letters. So you can use it as a template, and that is one reason why we make it available. So you can see all of the information that they've set out. If you haven't given us enough information, we're not going to just deny your application. We will write you back and ask for additional information. If we do that, we are asking these questions not because we think there's a problem with your event. We just have to have a record showing that if we're going to give our stamp of approval to it, that it at least meets the statutory requirements for whatever event you're trying to have us approve. So make sure you give us that information, and if we ask you questions, please answer them. Now, one thing you need to remember, you have to request pre-certification at least 10 days ahead of time. That is by administrative rule. If you don't request it 10 days ahead of time, then I can't approve it, but it doesn't mean that you can't have the event. It just means that it can't go with our official stamp of approval. And that rattles some people from time to time because they weren't aware of the rule or because they weren't looking at the calendar and things just got away from them. If you fall into that category and you didn't request within 10 days, you may still ask us specific questions about your event. So if you think you have a widely attended event, you can ask us the question, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have at least 12 people there. They're going to be invited from 2 separate committees. So they're going to be invited from every state agency in Alabama. Does that definitionally meet the requirement for a widely attended event? So if you're asking us a specific question about whether the event mirrors what the Code of Alabama requires for that event, then we can give that answer to you in an informal opinion. It's not a pre-certification, but it keeps you from having to kind of feel around about whether your event is okay. And we can really do that at any time. So that's really more of like an emergency kind of lifeline. Because sometimes we've had folks who have said, I didn't realize that the date was coming up. I've got, my folks who are going to be so mad that we didn't get this pre-certified. And so I really encourage people to not panic. Go ahead and ask us the questions. We can probably give you enough to at least satisfy whoever may be looking over your shoulder about this event, that what you're doing is certainly on the right track. And that also goes to this larger point. Don't be shy about asking questions. And go to the person you know the best, and the person you know the best should be Kayla Feld, who is our lobbyist liaison. I mandate that she actually works in the office, and she has our front office right as you walk in, and that is on purpose. So if you have a question, you need to stop in, go see Kayla. And ask her whatever. And that applies to any question you may have about the Ethics Act. Go to the person you know, ask Kayla, and Kayla will direct it within our office. If it's a legal question, she'll get it to the lawyers. If it's a filing question, she can probably answer it herself. If it's not ethics, I'm sure she'll tell you that. But be sure to talk to Kayla first. That's why we have her where we have her. I want to tell you about one other exception that is a standalone exception that you will probably utilize a good bit, and that is the food exception. You have an annual food allowance on top of every other exception that I've told you about. So as a lobbyist, you have a $25 per occasion annual cap of $150 per occasion for meals only. Your principal has a $50 per occasion and an annual cap of $250 annually for meals. That's a standalone exception on top of everything else. So if you're out and you want to take people out to dinner, remember that those are your limits. Okay? Do y'all have any questions about any of that? So you have the 2 standalones. You have de minimis and you have your food. And then you have the 3 exceptions that pretty much cover everything else, and that's widely attended event, far and away the largest used exception. Educational function, which is typically used in the summer but not exclusively, and then you have economic development exception, which is the less often used but still there. The last thing I'll say about these exceptions is, if you think you've got an economic development function, tell us that and argue to us why. One thing that we do in this office is not only read the Code of Alabama and tell you whether you've complied with it, but just every now and then you'll have a really weird situation come up. Okay, you'll have an event that may be a one-time thing that has an economic goal at its heart, but it might not otherwise be considered an economic development function. Let's say that you have, some unique event in your city where there are going to be representatives from all over the country coming there, You are highlighting your city for one event. It might be a one-time event, but you really want to put your best foot forward. And there may be future investment opportunities in your city from these groups who are visiting. And I'm keeping it purposefully vague because as soon as I get specific, somebody's going to throw it up as an economic development function, and as I dig into it, it might not actually be one of those. So I try to be a little careful about how specific I get. But I know that in that specific instance, we have pre-certified something as an economic development function because of its unique character. You might have a situation where you want to give something that is larger than de minimis to attendees at a certain function. We've had that come up before, where you're allowed to give promotional items, and I think most of you kind of know that. Let's say you've got a cup with a logo on it that really doesn't have much intrinsic value because it's placarded with all of your information. I mean, you're not going to go out and sell that on the open market, but you really are promoting your association or your industry, whatever it may be. And it may be more than $25. We have approved those as acceptable promotional items because of the nature in which they came up. One that comes to mind is when you have foreign dignitaries who are attending the state, maybe to celebrate the opening of a new plant, all right? And they're from an Asian country or a European country or wherever, but they bring an expensive item because that is just simply what they do. So rather than say, I am sorry, that is over $32 and nobody with Alabama can accept it, within the context in which it is being given, it is a promotional item. Now, usually those are left with a state agency or a state official in their official capacity. For example, if it's given to the governor, she may put it in her office rather than just taking it home. But occasionally you'll have attendees who will receive something that is more than just of a de minimis value. But nonetheless, under the circumstances, it is still a promotional item. I'm not going to give you a test on this at the end, but what I am saying is, if you have a question, you think you've got a good faith argument, you're not going to find a group that will consider it any more than the Ethics Commission will consider it. And we often will approve these things just simply because within the context in which they are arising, it just is consistent with the Act and everything that the Act allows. And again, that's one of our values, is that we can look at these things that don't neatly fit within the prescriptions of the Act, but say they are nonetheless consistent with what the Act allows. And so remember your additional food exception that you've got. If you have hang on a minute. I've already gone over all this. I'm not just cutting out good stuff. I've just kind of gone over it. Hospitality is something that comes up a lot. So hospitality is the fun stuff that is associated with an educational function, typically an educational function. The code requires that if you are going to offer hospitality as part of it, the hospitality has to be an integral part of the overall event. Now, what that usually looks like is that the hospitality is woven into the overall fabric of the event. It doesn't occur before the educational event takes place. It doesn't occur after it takes place. It is within the schedule of the events for the educational function. This is where golfing comes in. This is where fishing comes in. This is where receptions come in, and food is offered in conjunction with that. All of that is allowable hospitality, but again, it has to be an integral part of the event. The pre-certifications, the requests that are made to us and what is put on our website are helpful in determining how other groups have approached this, and you can see what we have approved in terms of hospitality. The 10-day thing. Okay, we do have a few opinions that are advisory opinions, rather, that are directed to lobbyists specifically. The first one came out in 2011 after the act was revised back in December of 2010. A question arose about the individual spending limits for food, the $25 limit for lobbyists and the $50 standalone that I told you about. And somebody asked if at the same event you could stack those together, and the commission in 2011 said that you cannot stack those together. They are separate expenditures that have to be made separately by the lobbyist and the principal. So that's been established since 2011. We get asked from time to time about whether someone who is only coming in to lobby on one specific issue and then come out of the state, whether because their lobbying in Alabama is so limited, whether they have to register as a lobbyist. This question was asked because some states require you to have a certain amount of activity in the state before the lobbying requirement is triggered. Alabama doesn't have that. We don't have a de minimis lobbying requirement. So if you are lobbying at all, you have to register in Alabama. I realize I'm speaking to the choir on that one. Sporting and recreational events, again, have to be an integral part of the overall function that qualifies as an exception, be it an educational function or a widely attended event. They can't be standalone. The context in which this question was answered, somebody after the law changed in 2011 wanted us to host a hunting trip out in Montana, and said that because they had more than 12 people coming, would that qualify as a widely attended event? That is when the commission said, no, it can't be purely recreational. There has to be some informational component to it. Now, as I said earlier, these kind of functions can be in conjunction with an overall event. So sometimes you will have things that are out of state. Like I know that some of the energy groups have meetings that are out west, and they have hospitality that can look like this in conjunction with the overall widely attended event that they are hosting. So that kind of thing is allowed, but we're more than happy to answer the questions about whether what you propose falls within this advisory opinion or whether it falls outside of it. So again, just ask. All right, 2018-01, this is one that you probably want to write down and that you want to remember, because this is the one that we gave to the BCA in 2018 where we talked about the aggregation of expenses. And so it really gives you guidance about what you have to report, how you can aggregate, what the limits are for that. We talk about charitable functions and how they figure into what you have to disclose. Of the opinions that we have given to lobbyists and to principals, I think this is probably the most instructional one in terms of compliance. So if you request pre-certification, from time to time we'll write a note on there, especially if you have multiple sponsors. We will write on there to be sure to comply with 2018-01 in terms of disclosure. So that might just be one that you want to read when you have the opportunity to do it. Okay, and some parting thoughts. Told you I was going to get you out of here within an hour. It helps when y'all don't ask questions. But remember to update your registration within 10 days. So if you take on a new client, if you take on a new area where you're lobbying, you have to update that within 10 days. Make sure you do that, not because it's going to be a problem for us, but because it could be a problem for you. Y'all know that folks will call up here all the time and say, so-and-so's over at the State House, they're lobbying for this group. That's not reflected on their lobbyist registration. They can't be over here lobbying. And I think they expect that we're going to go over there and do something about it. But what we're likely going to do is probably just give you a call and just say, do you need to update your lobbying registration? Somebody's called to say that you haven't registered for this group and you need to get your registration in. More often than not, what happens is you have taken on work for a new principal and they haven't confirmed that you're their lobbyist. More often than not, and Kayla, tell me if I'm wrong, more often than not, it's the principal's fault, not the lobbyist's fault. Okay, so y'all probably need to pick up the phone and say, listen, I'm catching grief down here because y'all haven't confirmed me. Some of them forget they've got to do it. Sometimes there's a message on somebody's desk. I don't know, but I do know that more often than not, it's your principal and not y'all. So remember to communicate with your principal, because that cuts down on a lot of problems. We've also noticed that early in the session, especially. People call up here and say, y'all have only got 5 lobbyists registered this year. No, we've actually got, 500 registered. They just haven't had their principal confirm. So again, it makes it easier on everybody if y'all will just communicate with your principals often and well and make sure that they have confirmed you. Remember your quarterly filings. Remember your next one is due April 30th. Make sure that you review those before you file them. We have had people file their quarterly filings. They've had somebody from their office file them, and then they realize that there's a problem with it. Usually because somebody else has pointed it out. Somebody has called and said they didn't disclose what they should have disclosed. Kayla will call the lobbyist and they'll say, oh my gosh, we'll pull it out. I'd have my office do it, and they did it incorrectly. So make sure that you review them before they're filed to ensure their accuracy, because it's ultimately going to be tagged to you. So make sure that what you're filing is accurate. Remember the 10-day rule for pre-certifications. I really don't want that to catch you, but if you get down to the wire and you haven't requested it, still ask the question. Ask what you can do. I promise you, if there's any way that we can help you, we will. And again, be sure to ask often. But any question you've got, Kayla is your best resource here. I hear good things about her. If she doesn't do a good job and you hate her, let me know, because that's the only way I can do anything. But everything I hear about her is really, really good. And I think she's probably the best resource out there. Just if you have a problem, call her, email her, send up a smoke signal, do whatever you can, because she is there to help you, as are the rest of us. So that gets us down to the end of it, believe it or not. I don't think I've got any questions, but I'm going to wait just a second. Either of y'all have anything? Oh, come on, ask me something. Make me earn my money. Okay, the audio is working. Everybody can hear, and I have no questions. All right, nobody has any questions here. All right, again, thank you for your time. I hope session has gone well for you. We're getting down to it. I think there's 7 days left. So, you might have a very busy 7 days. If there's anything that we can do to help you through that, again, please be sure to ask. And if you don't have any other questions, good luck to you.